Welcome back, everyone, to the show. Thank you so much for your support and companionship throughout this time. It really means a lot. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the upcoming in-depth analyses. Today, I want to dedicate this entire episode to the latest developments surrounding Nick Reiner. Recently revealed information that is changing how we view the whole affair. There are important details that were never previously disclosed, and they raise very serious questions about what is really going on behind bars. Stay until the end of the video, because what's about to be shared may give you a completely different perspective on the Nick Reiner case. First, I want to begin with what we are currently learning about the guardianship that Nick Reiner allegedly received in 2020. New details surrounding this form of guardianship are gradually being revealed, and they offer many thought-provoking perspectives. Of course, Nick Reiner is currently accused of murdering his parents, Rob and Michelle Reiner, in a case described as brutal and savage, occurring in their own home. According to the indictment, Reiner is accused of stabbing both his father and mother to death. However, setting aside the murder case for a moment, let's return to the issue of mental health guardianship, a crucial but often overlooked detail. According to reports, this guardianship lasted exactly 1 year, beginning in 2020. The New York Times reports that this is a form of guardianship called LPS, based on a 1967 law that established a new process for mandatory mental health treatment in California. It's worth noting that LPS guardianship differs significantly from the types of guardianship the public has heard of before, such as Britney Spears' case, which primarily involved financial control. Conversely, LPS guardianship typically begins with mandatory psychiatric hospitalization, and given Nick Reiner's long history of mental illness, this doesn't seem surprising. This form of guardianship allows a guardian, who may be a professional, a family member, or a family-appointed individual, to make important decisions regarding the patient's medical treatment and medication. In Reiner's case, the unique aspect is that this guardianship lasted only 1 year. Theoretically, this guardianship could be extended, but in practice, it cannot. And the reasons why it wasn't extended, who decided, and on what basis, are newly revealed details that I'll analyze in more detail later in this episode. We also know that Nick Reiner has a long history of mental illness. Currently, he's being held in jail, awaiting to see if he's finally fit to stand trial. According to TMZ, since the murder, Reiner has been in what they describe as a state of delirium. TMZ says he looks almost childlike in prison, unable to process or understand the consequences of his actions, not even fully aware of his surroundings. In their description, Reiner appears to have completely lost his mind. TMZ also reports that this state bears all the hallmarks of a methamphetamine-related murder, and that Reiner may have used methamphetamine at the time of the crime. If you've been following my show, you'll remember that last month I first mentioned this theory when I interviewed Dr. Drew, and that's exactly what he told me from the beginning. He strongly suspected methamphetamine was involved. Listen to what Dr. Drew shared. When he heard about the incident, he said bluntly, "This is definitely methamphetamine." He explained that methamphetamine makes people violent, causing them to grab sharp objects, and this isn't uncommon, especially in Los Angeles. People running around the streets with machetes, he believes, are mostly methamphetamine-related. Dr. Drew also added that when someone in that state commits violence against their own family members, they often experience temporary amnesia. He predicted that Reiner might not remember what happened, and that he wouldn't lie about it. Whether this amnesia stems from mental illness, methamphetamine use, or a combination of both, it essentially doesn't change the psychological reality of the situation. Legally, there's a very noteworthy development. Renowned defense attorney Alan Jackson has withdrawn from Nick Reiner's case. The official reason hasn't been released, but much speculation suggests Reiner's siblings no longer wish to continue paying his legal fees. I have some new information regarding the amount they may have paid Alan Jackson, and we'll discuss this further in our conversation with Morin shortly. But for now, it's clear that Nick Reiner no longer has a private attorney. He's being represented by a public defender, not a family-hired lawyer. I was delighted to speak with Morin O'Connell, a former FBI agent and host of the podcast Best Case, Worst Case. The conversation was particularly valuable because Morin is in Los Angeles and has been closely following the Nick Reiner case, even being present in court. One of the pieces of information circulating recently is that Nick Reiner has been in a state of delirium since the murders. Reports describe him as looking almost childlike in prison, not understanding the consequences of his actions, and not even knowing where he is. However, according to Morin O'Connell, these descriptions are unreliable. He suggests this is very likely part of a defense strategy. Before lawyer Alan Jackson withdrew from the case, it's highly probable that legal options were thoroughly discussed, with portraying a state of mental breakdown being considered the most viable defense strategy. According to Morin, this is not uncommon. Many defendants have deliberately acted as if they were insane for extended periods, especially when they knew they were being filmed, being observed, and the incident was attracting significant public attention. Regarding the methamphetamine factor, Morin stated that he suspected it from the beginning. Dr. Drew later suggested that Nick Reiner may have been experiencing a psychotic state due to methamphetamine use at the time of the murder. However, if that were true, and Reiner is no longer in contact with drugs because he is in custody, then logically, the delirium should have subsided somewhat. Nevertheless, Morin cautiously emphasized that he is not a medical expert. There are several possibilities. Reiner could have been perfectly lucid during periods when he wasn't being observed, then deliberately acted when he knew he was being watched, or he could have genuinely suffered from a mental illness, or perhaps a combination of both. According to him, the truth most likely lies somewhere between the two extremes the media is portraying. The most important aspect of Morin's assessment is what he witnessed firsthand in the courtroom. Contrary to reports that Reiner was completely disoriented, Morin stated that he displayed lucidity and situational awareness. Throughout the trial, Reiner appeared attentive to what was happening. While he occasionally exhibited unusual behavior, such as opening his mouth or giving a momentary intense stare, perhaps searching for a relative in the courtroom, overall, his conduct did not indicate complete disorder. Morin recounted that whenever the judge spoke directly to Reiner, he responded clearly, demonstrating that he understood the instructions given. When lawyer Alan Jackson spoke with him, Reiner nodded, indicating he grasped the content. Later, when the public defender took over and spoke to him privately, he reacted similarly. According to Morin's observations, Reiner showed no signs of an overdose of sedatives, nor was he unusually confused or distracted. From everything he witnessed, Morin O'Connell concluded that the image of Nick Reiner being completely out of his mind and unaware of what was happening did not match the reality in court. At least at that point, Reiner appeared quite normal given the context of a defendant facing serious charges. There are also new reports indicating that staff at the medical examiner's office, who have witnessed countless death scenes, have expressed particular concern about the condition of Rob and Michelle Reiner. I don't want to go into the horrific details, as we've discussed this before, but it must have been an extremely gruesome scene. The more I think about it, the more convinced I become that both Rob and Michelle were completely conscious when it happened. My reasoning is that the moment Nick Reiner entered the bedroom was like a sudden shock, an unexpected event. I don't know exactly how he approached, but if I were in that situation, I think the first target would most likely have been the father. The reason lies in survival instinct. When a person faces two other people at the same time, the natural reaction is to neutralize the one who is likely to overpower them first. In many previous accounts, Rob Reiner was described as someone who often tried to restrain his son when Nick lost control. If Nick Reiner was aware of this, then in his mind, the father would be the first threat to be eliminated, though I hate to use that word. If two people are lying in bed, under the covers, and one suddenly jumps on top of the other, the physical ability to resist is almost zero. Hands and feet are trapped, the body is pinned down, and in that moment, the victim has few options. But at the same time, that action would certainly wake the other person. Therefore, I am increasingly convinced that Michelle Reiner woke up and witnessed everything. Not only her son attacking her, but also the same thing happening to the husband she loved. Those two people clearly loved each other. And when you put it all together, it's hard to imagine this wasn't a deeply shocking scene for anyone present afterward. A natural question arises. If Nick started by attacking his father, Why didn't Michelle run away? Why didn't she try to reach for the phone to find an escape route? But in situations like this, instinct often overrides reason. A wife's first reaction is most likely not to flee, but to intervene and protect her husband. Time in those moments is incredibly short. Just a few seconds, a few actions, and everything can become irreversible. And that's what makes the scene, as many describe it, so particularly haunting. Of course, all these inferences ultimately need to be verified by forensic evidence. Analyzing the bloodstains, the direction of the splatter, the sequence of the wounds. All these elements can tell a very clear story. Who was attacked first, who was still alive at what point, and in what order the events unfolded. In previous conversations, I've learned that there are forensic techniques so sophisticated that they can collect fingerprints from human skin, an extremely complex, time-consuming process requiring specialized training. Though rarely mentioned publicly today, such methods underscore one thing: crime scenes can hold far more answers than we realize. And finally, however different the theories may be, one thing remains unchanged. What happened in that room was not just an act of violence, but a profound tragedy where two conscious individuals faced the most terrifying moment of their lives. But we've studied this very thoroughly, especially the FBI team in Los Angeles. To me, it's a really fascinating field, because before you can even try to take fingerprints from a person's body, there are many mandatory steps. First, you have to have a certain understanding of what happened, because nobody would sprinkle fingerprint powder all over the body. That would be both illogical and wouldn't provide any investigative value. The actual forensic procedure is still applied similarly to cases of suspected severe abuse. For example, when a child is believed to have been abused and has died, the examiners will turn on ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet light is used to reveal areas under the skin where bruises would have appeared if the victim were still alive. There's a familiar saying in forensic science: corpses don't bleed. Part of the bruising is due to internal bleeding when capillaries rupture. Therefore, when a person is restrained tightly enough to be held down, those marks can be seen before they surface. When attempting to collect fingerprints from a person's skin, the body is brought to room temperature. In the meantime, ultraviolet light is turned on to determine if any areas bear fingerprints. If the circumstances of death are known, focus is placed on areas where the perpetrator likely touched the victim's body. Then, oblique lighting is used, shining from multiple angles, rather than looking directly down at the surface. This is similar to lying flat on the ground to examine individual carpet fibers, aiming to detect even the smallest details. With fingerprints, lighting is crucial. You must shine a flashlight from every possible angle to ensure the edges of the ridges are clearly visible. I took fingerprints for a client a few days ago as part of my security consulting work. The client wanted fingerprints taken on a car, and it was the light, not the powder, that helped me see the ridges. The light shone on the edges of the fingerprints, making their structure more apparent. Fingerprinting, in any form, is a very slow process. It's nothing like what you see on television, where the powder is thickly swept up and spun rapidly. Doing so only fills in the ridges, blurring the details. I always work very slowly and very carefully. Although I'm certified in human skin fingerprinting techniques, this is a skill that's easily lost, and it's been a long time since I last performed it. Interestingly, I haven't heard of any recent cases where this method is still used. Perhaps it's because it's so time-consuming and not always successful. It's a gamble, and therefore it may no longer be considered a standard procedure. In many cases, collecting fingerprints on a knife or other surfaces in the bedroom is more practically valuable than trying to find fingerprints on a person's skin. As for Alan Jackson, his court appearance was clearly a shocking moment, as many learned he had been dismissed from the case. From what I've heard, the reason was definitely money. If it weren't for finances, that family would have hired a different lawyer long ago. It's reported they spent around $4 million on Alan Jackson. When he said that since December 14th, his entire team had been working almost around the clock, sometimes up to 18 to 20 hours a day, to develop the best defense for Nick, that partly explains why that money disappeared so quickly. Is Alan Jackson a good lawyer? The answer is yes. But such results wouldn't be achievable without working with extreme intensity. Even so, $4 million is a huge sum. I wouldn't dare claim this information is 100% accurate, as the source I heard, while seemingly reliable, hasn't been fully confirmed yet. However, it's noteworthy that after Alan Jackson left the case, the family didn't hire another private lawyer. Instead, the case was transferred to a public defender's office. This suggests that, for some reason, they may have turned their backs on their own brother. Perhaps they saw the photos. Perhaps they learned details not known to the public. No one can be certain. Time always plays a very special role in how people perceive major life events. At the moment an event occurs, we feel it in a certain way. But as time goes on, that perspective can change completely. This happens in many situations. Even in divorce cases, there are women who are betrayed, definitively end the relationship, file for divorce, and think everything is over. But a few months later, they return to forgive and reunite, leaving outsiders astonished. People can change their thinking based on many factors. In this case, I think the experience of personal loss can help explain it to some extent. After my mother passed away, though from natural causes, it was so sudden. When I returned to her house, everything was in chaos. She died in her own bed, and when you walk into that room, you just want to stay, just want to sit there and think endlessly about everything. I believe their family was going through similar emotions. I'm thinking especially of Romy. Perhaps she's going through the hardest time, having witnessed her father's condition firsthand. May God bless her. And I also pray for the two surviving children, Nick's brother and sister, who are undoubtedly under immense mental pressure. Meanwhile, I've seen images taken by some paparazzi. Honestly, it's terrifying and heartbreaking. They're hounding this family everywhere, even photographing them walking on the beach. Trying to photograph them at a time like this is incredibly despicable. I know that's the reality of Los Angeles, but every time I see those pictures, I still feel uneasy. Another detail that's been mentioned is the guardianship issue. There's information suggesting Nick was placed under mental health guardianship in 2020, but it only lasted a year and wasn't renewed. This is very significant. It's possible they didn't want him access to money. Because with addicts, even if you don't give them cash, just giving them a credit card is enough. They'll find a way to get it. Filling up gas to get cash, paying for expensive hotel rooms, and then negotiating, or using the money to fuel their addiction. That's how many people manage in this city. They're always looking for ways to spend money, because they're always chasing the thrill. So, it's quite possible Nick has once again proven that he can't take responsibility for himself. His family probably didn't want to continue giving him control over his finances. We don't know exactly what they were thinking or how much money he squandered, but it probably exceeded their tolerance limit. Is the one-year guardianship period surprising? Yes and no. Yes, because the evidence seems to suggest that Nick managed his money very poorly throughout his life and squandered a considerable fortune. But no, because sometimes decisions like that aren't based solely on records, but also on emotions, exhaustion, and the ultimate limits of those left behind. If a forensic accountant were asked to review everything, many would be stunned by the scale of the money squandered. But the important thing isn't the numbers. That family didn't just believe in second chances, they believed in countless chances. For them, the only thing that was always true was the desire for all their children to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and succeed. They did everything in their power, everything they believed was best for Nick. So, they're giving him almost every chance in the world is perfectly understandable. And in fact, they did just that. But that raises another question. Could this series of actions become a key factor if the case ultimately goes to court, especially if the defense is likely to revolve around the argument of insanity? After all, the family could easily demonstrate that Nick was once under guardianship. That guardianship wasn't just a formality. It allowed them to put him into rehabilitation programs, allowing them to make decisions for him, decisions he had previously always controlled himself. Notably, this phase seems to have occurred after the film Becoming Charlie, where Rob Reiner publicly admitted that he hadn't listened to the experts, that he believed he understood his son better than anyone and should only listen to his son. But when guardianship came into play, that perspective clearly changed. According to a close friend, Nick particularly hated being controlled. He considered it humiliating, a direct blow to his self-esteem, an unacceptable disgrace. Discussions about renewing guardianship were reportedly extremely tense. Just mentioning the possibility of being placed under control again was enough to make Nick explode, causing immediate chaos. This shows that this is not simply a story about mental illness. He resembles a physically mature but emotionally immature man, prone to outbursts of rage, a pattern of behavior repeated many times. He believes himself superior to others, and it is the act of being held accountable that shames him. Ironically, his own violent actions do not shame him, but being controlled does. Those around him, his parents, always act with the belief that they are protecting their son's best interests. Yet, in response, he loses his temper in his own home, causing his loved ones to live in fear. This doesn't seem to bother him, but when someone forces him to take responsibility, even minimally, he immediately loses control and drags everyone else into a painful spiral. Because, after all, everything revolves around him. He views guardianship as a degradation, a major blow to his ego. This is all the more thought-provoking considering that previously, attempts were made to portray him as weak, vague, and unable to remember what happened. But perhaps that's not the truth. He remembers, and it's quite possible that his current state stems from remembering everything, remembering what he did, and realizing that for the first time in his life, there's no one left to protect him. He once had two powerful parents who could turn the tide of any situation. But now, those two pillars are gone. His brother and sister have also gradually withdrawn. And for the first time, he truly faces loneliness, standing alone on an island without protection. And no one can like that feeling. Thank you for watching until the end. If you found this content insightful and thought-provoking, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to continue these important conversations. We will return to you later to discuss further developments in this case.